Good morning. Can everybody hear me okay? Do I need to talk louder? I was raised on a farm. I learned how to call hogs. I can do it. Are we okay now? Is that good? Okay. Pat gave me the subject this morning, and I really had a lot of fun thinking it through. I'm trying to say all I know in 20 minutes, and so that's been a real fun project. You know, I have been for 30 years, and there's just so much I would love to say about my own journey to tell you why this is such an important subject to me. But I'm sure it started with my own childhood and my own father who was absent, more importantly, was weak and never protected me from my mother. So, and the issues from there, and I have a special place in my heart, started out of the wrong reasons, but a special place in my heart for broken men as I first idolized my father, thinking he was the cat's meow until I was older and realized that he didn't protect me from my mother and that he, in many ways, betrayed everything that he promised with his words. But when forgiveness comes, it's amazing how then part of where God rescues you is where he teaches you to love. So I have a special place in my heart for broken men, and then along the way, God has done other things. I think as I worked through my own sexual abuse struggle, God did some work in that way. But to come full circle, it's amazing to me that in my practice, one of my sweetest ministries is to couples and then also to men. And I think what I want to share with you this morning is something that I've seen and gleaned over the last 30 years. And I really, there's just so much to know. I feel like I'm just a baby in learning about what it means to heal in this category. But I know something. So I want to share with you what I do know. And I want to talk a little bit about just what's happened to the men in our generation. And then we'll try to bring it home to where we are. The best, I've taken, I have permission from this fellow several years ago, I worked with a man and his wife, and we ended up spending more time with him because he was so broken. And I'm going to use him with his permission, anonymously, of course, changing a lot of the facts of it, but it was a client that I had in Miami about 20 years ago, so I think we're pretty safe, and plus I have his permission. But I want to start off giving you a profile of this man whom we will call Charlie, and first say to you that Charlie is a lot like, he reminds me, when I met him even, a lot like the character Tom in Prince of Tides. I don't know if you've seen that movie, but Charlie was, I think, the profile of a typical American male and Christian male. Tom was the profile of a typical American male. Now I realize I'm starting off giving characteristics of a character in a movie as a way of introducing Charlie, but nevertheless I'm doing that. Tom in the movie Prince of Tides was certainly a man who lived on the surface of life, not on the edge of life. At the age of 41, he was bored, dissatisfied with his work, and I think temporarily unemployed. His wife, in seeking to engage him about their empty marriage, his only response was to crack a joke. He'd recently lost his older brother to a needless death, wasn't speaking to his mother, and just received news that his sister had just attempted another suicide, and he was still laughing. This was Tom. After a brief encounter with the therapist that was helping his suicidal sister, he came to some insight so that he was able to enter into a little bit more reality, present reality, certainly not past. And he said to his wife these words, which I think are simple but very typical and very sad. He said, "I wish the words, 'I love you,' were not so difficult for me. I don't know what keeps me at such a distance. I'm sorry I disappoint you, Sarah, but you're right to feel that way. How else could you react to half a man? How could you not be disappointed? Hell, I seem to disappoint anyone who tries to find the best in me." End of quote. More about Charlie. Charlie was age 43 at the time I met him, and he was married for 13 years and had 3 children. He was a successful owner of a small business and a workaholic. His biggest complaint about his wife was that she never supported his interests, she wasn't affectionate enough, and she was dominating. He was overly compliant in order to avoid conflict at all costs. He took most of his anger out on his oldest son. He actually reported being fairly obsessed with his son's imperfections and needed him to look perfect. Saw him as a direct reflection of him. He had a 20-year pornography addiction with occasional one-night stands. And you know, in the last 30 years, I'm sorry to say that's becoming the typical Christian American male. That's why I picked him, I think, is because he was just an average guy who was respected in his community and had a good heart. In fact, one of the most enjoyable times I've had with a client was with Charlie, because he had this incredibly open, tender heart and was in many ways willing to let just a little boy come out in my counseling room, and he went through a wonderful healing. And to this day, he's just a man who struggles, but he struggles with such integrity, and that all you can do is just respect and enjoy him. But you know, there's an epidemic. You know, in the Industrial Revolution, the man left the farm, went to work. With the women's movement, the woman left the house and went to work. And we now have generations of children who are just, they're not abused, they're just kind of missed. You know, they're neglected. And I'm not so sure that neglect isn't a more insidious heritage than even outright abuse or outright rejection. You know, you leave a baby in the crib and you don't attend to him, something happens inside of him. You know, in extreme cases of abandonment, you've all read the stories, the baby cries for hours, then they quit crying, and then they never cry. And then I've had parents who adopted abused babies or neglected or abandoned babies, and they hold them, they won't let them hold them, they're stiff. And then they have to do holding therapy and a whole lot of work. Or if they're not so abused, they might just be stiff for a while, and then they'll finally let themselves be hugged, and then they won't let go. But you know, when you have babies that are like that in their normal, average Christian homes, something shuts down in them, and certain defenses start to kick in that closes them off from healthy relationships in the future. So it's a big deal that moms went to work. And I'm not against women working, of course. But I am against women making their work priority over their children and their family. And if they can't work that around their children and their needs, they shouldn't be working. And if they can't do that, they can't afford it, then they shouldn't have babies. I know that's really strong, but I thought I'd just put a plug in there. Because it's a big deal, and it's a soapbox I'd like to get on right now, and will not. Okay. But because of the Industrial Revolution, the women's movement, the breakdown of the parenting has happened. And obviously all kinds of other reasons the breakdown in parenting has happened. And by the way, did I mention the effects of the fall? You know, because of the fall, we all have a tendency to do our own thing and not to know how to love. But in the counseling room, I see little boys who have not entered adulthood with the confidence that they have what it takes to be a successful man, to be successful at being a man, not to success as in work, but internally, to be a man. And the damage reveals itself on a continuum of symptoms, from not so major symptoms of the damage that is more minimal and damage that is greater. And on that continuum, we'd have passivity over here, the man who's silent, the man who tends to be a bit irresponsible, the man who's anxious about his world. And then on this side, we would have a man who struggles with homosexuality, sexual addictions, and a man who tends toward violence. We have men who are always angry and men who never get angry. We have men who control abusively and men who won't take leadership of any kind, and are especially submissive to their wives in a way that isn't loving, but is just to avoid conflict. Men who are controlled by their fear of failure or fear of being exposed or being found out. Men who are trying to do the right thing, but their rage is leaking all over their relationships. In many ways, the homosexual, the cross-dresser, the transvestite, and let me correct that, the man, not the homosexual, that sounds like identity, the man who struggles with homosexuality, transvestism, or cross-dressing is moving closer to abdicating maleness altogether. And you know, those perversions are gender issues primarily. They're not sexual issues primarily. The symptom is the sexual issue. So if you stop the behavior, you haven't done anything toward the healing. You've only done something toward obedience, to doing the right thing. And God is interested in deeper healing. I think that was my mistake for years, was to think that stopping the behavior was healing. And that's no small thing, of course, but it's just the beginning. It's not the end of anything. You know, we didn't get here just because we like to sin. You know, the truth is, there are so many people, men and women, who want to do the right thing and really feel powerless to do so. And I think our society and our church especially has said, will it, guts it out, you know, just do the right thing, and have defined us in terms of some surface behavior rather than going a little bit deeper to see what motivates us. And I'm not interested in looking deeper to get us off the hook so that we don't have to be responsible for our sin. I am saying, though, that there's maybe more to it than just saying, shape up, do right, don't do wrong. You know, our men have been hurt. Someone has said that our men of this generation are stuck in their adolescence. And that may sound a bit demeaning, but it's not meant to be when I heard it said, and it rung true with me, and I'll tell you how. The generation of, or the adolescence is the period of narcissism. And it's not a period of narcissism as in the DSM, you know, the narcissistic personality disorder. You know, all adolescents are narcissists, and they're supposed to be. Because what are they doing during that period? They're asking the whole world, especially a respected male mentor, especially their fathers, they're asking the question, whether they say it out loud or not. They're saying, do I have what it takes to be a man? They're saying, if I dare step up to the plate, will I be the fool? They're saying, will a man somewhere come close to me so I can learn what being a man is? That's the question. It's all about them. And it's supposed to be, you know, symbiosis, which happens the first year of life. Is basically the first period of narcissism necessarily. And obviously, if a baby gets stuck in that period, needs aren't met, they tend to end up with a narcissistic personality disorder. But adolescence is another period where there's legitimate narcissism, where they are focused on themselves and are asking the question, and they need that resolved if they're going to move on into manhood and be capable not only of intimacy, but of mature, other-centered loving. You know, the bottom line is, if I'm drowning, I'm not interested in what's happening with you. But if I'm sitting on the shore dry and you're drowning, I'll rescue you. But the point is, you know, we're so hard on our fellow man. We say, well, why don't you love right? Well, we need to say that, but we need to also say, how come you're not loving right? Is it just because you're a sinner, or are you stuck? Does that make sense? So I guess I'm saying there's more going on here than just do right, be a good boy. If that little boy is affirmed well enough, and nobody's perfect. I mean, the fall happened, and even though we're in the process of redemption, you know, good enough parenting is all that's required, not perfect parenting. But if he is affirmed well enough, then he will strut. You ever seen a junior high kid strut? It's so cool. I mean, I just love it. They're just like, you know, testosterone all over the place. It's just wonderful. If that's true, then he can move into adulthood. But a man who does not get to strut in adolescence before admiring eyes that have power to affirm him will do a selfish, albeit dangerous strut in adulthood. Little boys need empowerment and connection. And if they do not get it, they are set up for perversion and for counterfeit and false intimacy. You know, why do little boys join gangs? You know, if they don't have a man affirming them, they'll have their gang members affirm them. If they don't feel power, they will pull a knife out and feel power. They will get power one way or the other. And if they don't have to have power, then something in them has died, and they go the other extreme and totally abdicate, even looking to have power. So either extreme is a perversion. The dating in elementary school and junior high school, little boys and girls, it's a little boy in many ways looking for affirmation where he shouldn't be looking for it. We could talk about girls too, but we're not here to talk about women today. But the whole point, I meet a lot of couples who've met when they were 12 and 13. And it's clear that there's an enmeshment there that has to do with looking to the other one for needs that they didn't have in their family. And then when they grow up and mature, they're in a strange sort of way can't live with each other and can't live without each other. but it's the wrong kind of love. It's more of a need-based, fill-me-up love than a mature love, and they can't make the transition. But many do, with getting some help, can do that. And some, because in the meanwhile they've maybe become Christians or they've been able to have some personal insight, then they can make it through, but usually it requires a little bit of help. Pornography, one-night stands, affairs, all that really is low-risk, high-impact false intimacy. It's some level, if you're close with someone that you don't have to live with, that you don't care, that loves you, then there's not anywhere near the risk. And that's why many men can go out and be a CEO of a company and come home and cower with their wives. And there's just something that happens in a no-risk relationship that a man feels more like a man if, in fact, or because it feels safe and because there doesn't seem to be a price to pay. The ironic thing, though, the sad thing, is that hurt people hurt people. I borrowed that from Beth Moore. I did a study a couple months ago. I thought there was a really neat line. Hurt people hurt people. Charlie, my friend, was a true victim and a true victimizer. He had been destroyed, and now he had become the destroyer. His children and his family had some very sad stories to tell. I had mentioned before, he took his anger out on his oldest son. He just humiliated him at various points. And of course, this was one of the contentions between he and his wife. But the healing process must include two things. Grieving the wounds inflicted on you and grieving the wounds that you inflict on others, which is basically another way of saying repentance for your sinful response to legitimate wounding. But before you can look at your sin, frankly, you've got to look at your wounds. And if you want to trace your worst sins, it will be to follow your wounds and find out what you did with them. We usually do one or the other, but not both. We usually we have two camps almost, even in Christian counseling. One that just looks all day at the pain and people walk away feeling almost justified to be selfish. Now it's my turn. Or we have people who are so looking at the sin that they just trod right over the broken heart of the person and the wounds. And both of those are good things to do, but do them by themselves and they're destructive. And do not lead to mature loving, and do not lead to a person being able to take in and to deal with the scarring and the wounds, let alone to do good repenting. And we're just too quick to talk about forgiveness before we talk about the wound. But we better get to forgiveness. So, the whole point is that there are two biggies here that I think need to go hand in hand. The healing process is a journey, a struggle. Exodus 23:29 talks about little by little they claim the promised land, and it's a lifelong journey. Frankly, I'm 58 years old now, and I just am amazed that the journey just sometimes gets rougher. But it's just so cool to see that God is still in the redemption process and that He's doing something in me. And the only way I can reconcile the fact the journey gets rougher is one day He's going to come take me home and I'm going to be everything He wants me to be. But meanwhile, it's my responsibility to spend most of my time on the floor in front of the cross. Did you all see the movie Luther? I love that movie. You have to go see it. It's just wonderful. And I can still just feel Martin Luther laying on that stone floor. And he said, I'm yours, save me. And I think spirituality, sometimes we think spirituality is we don't ever have to get on the floor and say, Lord, save me. I think real spirituality is when we really know ourselves, it's always on the floor, Lord, save me, or I won't make it through the day. And there's something that's bad news about that, but really it's good news. Because if He calls that spirituality, then it's up from here. I don't have to fall, I'm already down there. And there's just something wonderful about, if you can imagine for a moment, the real strength is the strength that comes from you being on the floor and then the Holy Spirit moving into that place, and then you move in strength. And I'll guarantee you, if we don't fall on the floor in front of Him in private, we will in public in some way. I found that to be true in my own life. But I love Genesis 32. It's probably one of my favorite chapters. That's Jacob. And I love it because it speaks of certainly the journey of wrestling, and that it's not only not prohibitive to wrestle with God, but it's a requirement, and it's what God wants us to do. But I think I love it because God said to him, "What's your name? What is your name?" And you know, in the Old Testament, when you ask somebody what their name is, what you're really saying is, "Tell me your story. Tell me the truth about yourself." And I think our problem is that we don't want to know the truth. You know, we don't really believe that the truth sets us free. And I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit here, but Jacob said, you know, I'm a trickster, I'm a supplanter, I'm a conniver, a manipulator. And he wrestled with God. And I don't understand that chapter. I don't know exactly. All I know is somewhere God stepped on him and he walked away with a limp. And I know that he changed his name, which means he didn't just change his name, he changed his person. And he became known as Israel, the father of many nations. And he was never the same after that honest wrestling. And I'm sure that wasn't the end of his wrestling, but that was certainly the beginning of God getting his attention and of the change. And I love it because it sounds like the worst nightmare, but it said he wouldn't let go of the angel of the Lord until he revealed himself to him, until he blessed him, which is another way of saying in the Old Testament, till the God himself showed him himself and gave him his presence. You know, that takes me back to Exodus 33, where Moses says, "I won't go to the promised land if your presence doesn't go with me." So the first step in the healing process is to face the truth. And in facing the truth, there are two things that are important: embrace weakness and embrace pain. You know, God has called men to move in their world in strength, a tender strength, but nevertheless a strength. In the women's movement, I'm afraid that we've so feminized our men that we've shamed them into something. We make them apologize for opening doors for us. We make them apologize for their strength, and we shame them further. Due to the fall and its effects, meaning the effects of the sin on our parents, the effects on the generations of their children, and not to mention the effect on us and our own choice to sin, we do not want to embrace weakness. It feels less manly. Spirituality appears less manly. The typical Christian male does not enjoy what Don Hudson coined. I love his words in The Silence of Adam: the adequacy of inadequacy. Isaiah 57:9-10 says, "You were wearied by all your ways, but you would not say it is hopeless. You found renewal of your strength, so you did not faint." So there again, I see Luther on the floor. I'm yours, save me. Embracing the pain. Mental illness is what we do to run away from pain. Mental illness is what we do to run away from pain. Now, I'm not saying all of you guys are mentally ill. If you are, then so are all of us women. But I am saying, if it's true that mental illness is what we do to run away from pain, then on that continuum, a lot of us are in some difficulty, even if we're not institutionalized. There are three kinds of wounds. Rejection: you are not good, shoved away, not delighted in, no one knows you. You know, that's the longing of the heart, and you don't need to be ashamed of that. Neglect is another kind of a wound. Deprivation: parents not giving the basic needs, or meeting the basic needs, or the needs have been shamed. There's a loneliness and emptiness that you're living with. Lack of nurturing, affection, the lack of being taught how to do life. A lack of giving strength to the child. And then there's abuse, a third kind of wound: emotional, sexual, physical, spiritual misuse of power. You know, a lot of times in a home where there's physical abuse, the child is afraid to be angry. The consequences are so great, which begins that process of suppressing it. Sexual abuse can be something as small as sexual leering, dirty talk, pictures, a spouse making a child, especially opposite-sex child, more important to them than their other spouse, which breaks the boundaries and makes the child feel that he has adult responsibility to take care of mom or to take care of dad, depending on which sex it is. Emotional abuse, enmeshment, domination, mixed messages. You know, in many houses, people say, oh, I can't imagine what happened to that kid because the family is just such a nice family. But you know, there's so many different degrees, and sometimes it's the nice family with sins to cover up that makes the child feel crazy and confused. You know, a lot of mothers, you know, have some problems with their children, and they feel so guilty about it. They try to do the right thing without dealing with the underlying problem. Let's say the mother can't quite accept that child, reminds her of her Uncle Ed who abused her, or the husband who divorced her, or she's so physically focused the child's not pretty enough or handsome enough or strong enough or smart enough, but she knows it's wrong. She feels really bad about that, so she tries to do the right thing, but the kid picks up the double message. In many ways, I'm surprised how many people don't know what the truth is about what they need to grieve over because of the family that tries to do the right thing and covers it up rather than exposes and deals with it. Dads are too distant or shaming. Moms are too close or absent altogether. Parents are too busy serving themselves or living their lives through their children. So the generational sins go on and on. Charlie's history. His parents were divorced at age 13. His dad berated him as a child or paid no attention to him at all. His mom put him in the place of the surrogate husband, but she favored his younger brother. At 7 or 8, he found Dad's pornography in the house. At 8, he joined his friend to watch his older sister in the shower. At age 8, an older man made him perform oral sex on him. He had a flashback of that as a teen, and he felt sickened by it, as he reports it. At age 20 was when he realized that it was a real memory. And he broke down at that point, and he remembers asking, am I a real man? As a teen, he caroused with his buddies, admittedly to prove that he was a man. He stayed away from male teachers, and he said the reason was two reasons. One, he was afraid he would have sexual feelings. 2, what if they see through me and know that I am not a man? And one more note, as an adult, and working through his therapy, he came to the place where he began to own his mother's rejection, and I believe an evilness about her rejection. In fact, after much struggle, when he chose his wife over his mother, which, by the way, we have a whole world of adolescent men who are choosing their mothers over their wives, or not dealing with why they hate their mothers, one of the two. But when he chose his wife over his mother, she abandoned him completely, and as far as I know, still will not speak to him. We really do not believe, as I said, that the truth makes us free, or we wouldn't spend so much energy running from it. We reduce our lives to something small over which we have the illusion of control. We live lives that do not require much supernatural intervention, for we have numbed ourselves or we filled ourselves up with pathetic imitations. Our goal is pain-free lives, not loving others, not living on the edge, not adventure. Therefore, we don't have to walk in the Spirit, because walking in the flesh is working just fine. If we hold our pain away from our conscious minds, we hold ourselves away from God. Thus, we are at the mercy of little gods and counterfeits. How can we invite God into a place of wounding that we have not acknowledged? Psalm 34:18 says, God is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. We have to enter despair if we want to enter Him. We have to enter despair if we want Him to enter us. Isaiah 61:3, I'm just giving you one verse. I'm making myself only stick to one verse. There's just so many good scriptures along these lines. But the most powerful one is in Isaiah 61:3. To all who mourn, He will give beauty for ashes, joy instead of mourning, praise instead of despair. For the Lord has planted them like strong and graceful oaks for His own glory. He wants you to be a strong and a graceful oak for His glory. But you'll have to go through hell to get there. A little fine print. The goal of His comfort, 2 Corinthians 1:3 and 4, is so we can comfort others. It's wonderful. If we have not been comforted, we cannot comfort. And if we have not been loved, we cannot love. And trust me, you have not been loved well. But guess what? We have another. He calls Himself the Comforter. Isn't that interesting? He is in you. And He can love, but you can't. But you can't access Him until you say, I can't. It's so ironic that the Christian experience is all about strength out of weakness, life out of death. Go figure. Just go figure. But see, if your father shamed you, or if you see weakness as less manly, you aren't going to lay on the floor in front of the cross. So to embrace weakness, you have to face how come you hate it. And then as you weep, the weeping will take you to the floor. And then that will take you to Him. Isn't that neat how He laid that out? So the way up is down. We've heard that all our lives. We just didn't know it meant this way. The cross. He died on the cross to carry my sins and my wounds, which is a new thought to me. I've been exposed recently to Leanne Payne. I love her books. And one of her disciples is named Mark Pertwee, which I want to give credit for some of my thoughts in the next couple minutes, and I'm through. He died on the cross to carry my sins and my wounds. Isaiah 53:4-5. He bore our griefs and carried our sorrows, pierced for our transgressions. By His wounds we are healed. He died to take our sins and guilt and the power and effect of other sins on us. Matthew 11:28-30. Come unto me, all that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light, and you will find rest for your souls. Rest for your souls. How do we access His healing? Okay, I'm going to give you a 4-point outline, which, of course, it's no such thing as a 4-point outline and steps, but I do want to kind of give you something to kind of chew on. Name the sin, your sinful response to your wounds. And if you need to get more specific, then you have to come to me for counseling. And name the sin against you. Name the sin against you. Be honest. Number 2, release the pain. That means face the pain, don't run. Get specific. Vagueness is a way of not dealing with it. We don't want to tell the specific story and get too detailed, because then we might feel it. And then we might really be unnerved. But we have to get specific. Let yourself feel the pain, the anger, and the abandonment, and then hold on to God for dear life in the middle of that. Isaiah 30:19, cry out, He will answer. Under pain also, in releasing the pain, ache in the presence of God and wait. That's why I love Jacob too. He ached, he stood in the presence of God with his pain, and he stayed there until God came through for him. Come, Lord Jesus. Be angry. Anger is usually the first thing you feel when you come out of denial. The grief comes later. And by the way, I've been known to say that I believe for a lot of men who are passive or broken, anger is the doorway to getting back their testosterone, to getting back their persons. You know, you have to be able to be angry. There's something healthy about that. Don't kill anybody, but you need to own that anger is there. I don't know of any man that's come alive that hasn't gone through the door of anger. So now I'm got the banner for anger. Let yourself be angry at God, but when you're finished screaming, stop and listen to Him. And He says, and I quote Mark in this, "The more you fight against me, little lamb, the more I will ardently pursue you." It's almost there's a requirement to fight. Dan Allender said one time, you can't really surrender until you've got your back up and fought and screamed. You know, what are you surrendering if you're already limp on the floor? So you have to have a good fight before you surrender. He's bigger than your hatred. He's bigger. And then grieve, not self-pity. Hosea 7:14 says, they do not cry to me from their hearts, but they wail upon their beds. There's no hope in that. There's no hope in wailing on your beds. You need to cry from your heart. There's a difference. It's not, we aren't facing our wounds as, like in a toilet, down and into the dark hole, but, facing our sadness and our wounds up and out into freedom. Come to the cross. Come to the cross. And bow your heads right now, and I want you in your own hearts, if you want, pray this prayer with me. Father, actually, why don't you pray with me? I'll say the line and you repeat it after me if you want to. Father, take my sins and the effects of other sins upon me, away from me into the cross. I confess my emptiness, my anger, my self-pity. Jesus, take these into yourself on the cross. I bring also to you my loneliness. take it into the cross. Amen. And then he says, loose forgiveness. You know, when you've done all this work, forgiveness comes later. Matthew 18 says, if you can't forgive, it just means you don't really realize what a sorry mess you are. When you really get a glimpse of how you wounded others, then you will be much quicker to be able, it's an easy slide to forgiving those who have failed you and who have almost destroyed you. It's a choice to love, forgiveness is. It's not excusing evil. It doesn't even necessarily mean reconciling a relationship. Dan Allender handles that really well in his book, Bold Love. If they aren't willing to own their sin, then maybe you never will have a relationship, but you have to forgive. And then lastly, let the Abba Father fill up the lack. He's the man. He will come alongside and he will teach you what it means to be a man's man, even a God man. God bless you.